They fed the babies. They clothed the babies. But they never spoke to them. No single word. Not even a lullaby. Why? Because Emperor Frederick II, medieval genius, crowned ruler, and occasional lunatic, wanted to hear the voice of God. No, not metaphorically. Literally. You see, Frederick believed that babies, if raised without hearing any human speech whatsoever, would eventually start speaking the original language of mankind. The divine tongue. The Holy Mother speech. Hebrew? Greek? Latin? He didn't care. He just wanted answers. So he took a bunch of newborns and plunged them into silence. What happened next was not enlightenment. It was something else. Something far worse. And, disturbingly, Frederick was far from the only ruler to try it. Ah, yes, Frederick II. They called him Stupor-Mundi, the wonder of the world. And as someone who's seen most of the world from under various thrones and tea carts, I can tell you few titles have ever been so ill-fitting. Now, Frederick was brilliant. I'll give him that. He spoke 6 languages, studied astronomy, kept exotic beasts in his private zoo so he could dissect them at leisure. He debated Muslim scholars and once tried to prove that chickens laid better eggs when serenaded by lute music. All right, I made that last one up, but it wouldn't have surprised me. Yet for all his intellectual sparkle, he harbored a singular obsession. What language did Adam and Eve speak before humanity got drop-kicked out of Eden? The original tongue, the language, the sacred syllables unsullied by mortal babble. And Frederick had a theory. He believed the divine language still existed, buried deep in the soul. All it needed was silence to be revealed. So, what did he do? Naturally, he stole a bunch of babies. The plan was, shall we say, unhinged adjacent. He had infants taken from their mothers and handed to nurses under one monstrous instruction. Do not speak. No babbling. No lullabies. No human warmth. They were allowed to feed and bathe the babies, but affection? Emotion? Forbidden. Frederick figured that if these tiny speechless humans were raised in a vacuum, some divine mother tongue would just hatch out of their mouths like a phoenix of holy phonetics. Would it be Hebrew? Greek? Maybe Esperanto, if we're being ironic? But instead of divine enlightenment, the children just went quiet. First, they stopped giggling, then they stopped crying, and eventually, they stopped breathing. Oh, it gets worse. The nurses followed instructions to the letter. No whisper, no hum. They fed the babies like machines, bathed them, and watched them drift in silence like little ghosts in cradles. Weeks passed, months. The rooms remained dreadfully quiet. No single syllable. And in the end, they died. Not from plague, nor from stabbing. Just nothing. A complete and utter vacuum of human connection. Frederick, in his genius, had effectively created the world's first medieval sensory deprivation chamber. And if you're wondering whether that counts as science, no, that's not science. That's cruelty wearing a powdered wig. Modern psychology has a term for what happened: failure to thrive. It's what occurs when babies are given food and water, but not love. Without eye contact, cuddles, or the dulcet tones of someone cooing, "Who's my little grubworm?" Their brains don't develop. Their bodies literally begin to shut down. The human body doesn't just want connection, it requires it. Frederick didn't discover the language of God. He discovered that silence kills. He just wasn't bright enough to realize that's what he'd done. Now, you might think, surely no other ruler would try something this daft. Oh, my naive little crumpet. Let me introduce you to a pharaoh with a shepherd problem. Let's rewind the scroll a few centuries, back to 7th century BC Egypt, to a pharaoh named Psamtik I. Now, Psamtik had a similar itch in his royal wig. What was the first language? Not just the first humans invented, but the one they were born knowing. The divine tongue, the linguistic version of a starter Pokemon. And Psamtik, like most powerful men with too much time and too few moral boundaries, decided to test this out on babies. Because of course he did. According to Herodotus, historian, storyteller, and part-time gossip, Psamtik ordered 2 newborns taken from their mothers and placed under the care of a shepherd. But not just any shepherd. This man was to keep completely silent. In some versions, he was mute. In others, just strictly gagged by royal decree. Either way, the shepherd's job was simple. Feed the babies, water them, and shut up. No stories, no lullabies. Not even the Egyptian equivalent of "I stepped on a scorpion again." Psamtik's idea was that left to their own devices, the babies would eventually speak something, and that something would be the language of the gods. After some years of quiet caretaking, the story goes that one child looked up and cried, "Echoes." Astonished, Psamtik called in scholars to translate this holy word. What could it mean? Language of the heavens? The song of the stars? Nope. It meant bread. In Phrygian, which, awkwardly, was the language of a kingdom younger than Egypt. Psamtik, in his quest to prove that Egypt was the oldest civilization, accidentally proved that it wasn't. Historical faceplant. Now, most modern historians view this tale as highly mythologized, possibly made up, possibly exaggerated by Herodotus over a goblet of whatever ancient Greeks used instead of gin. But even if it never happened, the story tells us something grimly consistent. Powerful people really want to find a pure language, one that existed before culture, borders, or babbling. And instead of reading books or asking linguists, they turn to silence, to isolation, to babies. Why? Because to them, babies are blank slates. But I've lived long enough to know, babies aren't slates. They're sponges. They don't absorb silence. They drown in it. And speaking of drowning, wait until you meet the Scottish king who tested this theory using shipwrecks and nannies. King James IV of Scotland, a man of learning, intellect, and an alarming willingness to dabble in the DIY sciences. You see, while most Renaissance monarchs were content to wage war, marry cousins, and die young, James was performing his own dental surgeries, voluntarily, on people. But dentistry wasn't his only extracurricular. No, James had a pet theory. He believed in the existence of a perfect language, the original unspoiled tongue of Adam and Eve. A language unsullied by serpent tongues or Sunday school. Sounds familiar. And how does one test such a thing? Easy. Kidnap 2 newborns, hand them to a mute wet nurse, and maroon the lot on Inchkeith, a bleak speck of rock off the Scottish coast. No talking, no teaching, just silence, sea spray, and the soft hope that the babies would spontaneously speak the words of God between colic fits. As one does, of course. Now, according to Robert Lindsay of Pitt Scotty, a man whose name sounds like a pub crawled, out of itself, the experiment went swimmingly. The children, he claimed, began speaking Hebrew. Yes, Hebrew, presumably with thick Scottish accents. Naturally, because if you're inventing a holy miracle, best go with the language already branded official scripture. Forget proof. Forget transcripts. Just imagine 2 toddlers chanting the Torah on a cliffside while seagulls cry in Aramaic. Historians, as you might expect, have filed this one under folklore and fumes. Still, James's stunt wasn't an outlier. It was a symptom of the same deranged fever that infected pharaohs and kaisers alike. The belief that silence can birth enlightenment. And always at the center of it, children. Children reduced to sacred test tubes. But James wasn't the only emperor playing God with pacifiers and hypotheses. To find the next madman in this wretched parade, we travel east, where silence had a palace of its own. Enter Akbar the Great, ruler of the Mughal Empire. philosopher king, dazzler of courts, wearer of fine hats. Unlike our previous contestants, Akbar was actually, well, brilliant. He welcomed thinkers of all faiths, held debates between Hindus, Jains, Muslims, Christians, and anyone brave enough to show up. He was, in short, a man addicted to knowledge. But even wise men have blind spots. Akbar had a burning question: is language natural or learned? And instead of reading a book like a normal person, he built an entire compound, a literal house of silence, to find out. Newborns were placed inside, attended by mute nurses, or, depending on the account, staff forbidden from uttering so much as a hum. No singing, no names, no motherly crooning or peekaboo. Just feeding, cleaning, silence. His theory? If language is innate, the children would eventually start jabbering in some divine proto-speak. Sanskrit perhaps, or Urdu, or whatever God was using that week. But instead, the children did what one might expect when raised in a sensory deprivation dungeon. They did nothing. No words or invented signs. No mimic sounds. Their development stalled. Their minds dulled. Their spirits, if one can say so, dimmed. And then, in a shocking twist for a royal scientist, Akbar did something unheard of. He changed his bloody mind. Shocker, I know. He concluded correctly that language is learned, not innate, not divine, not lurking in the lungs waiting for the right Gregorian silence. A moment of clarity in a long, echoing corridor of ignorance. Still, let's not crown him Emperor of Empathy just yet. He's still locked up babies in a prison of quiet and waited to see what came out. But his conclusion was sound. Language, he realized, is forged through connection, not isolation. It is a dance of mimicry, laughter, and absurd bedtime stories, not something that floats down from heaven like angel confetti. And with that, the final royal experiment crumbled. No God speak, no universal truth, just a trail of mute children and monarchs whispering into the void. But wait, you cry. What is the real answer then? If not Edenic Hebrew or Persian poetry, then what? Well now, hold your breath and your hubris, dear viewer. We've reached the end of the silent road. Brace yourselves, because here it is, the grand, divine, celestial secret of the original language is there isn't one. There is no primordial code imprinted on our souls like some holy captcha. No sacred tongue waiting to slip out if only we'd shut up long enough. Language, brace for disappointment, is not magic. It's messy, earthly, and gloriously human. Children don't acquire language by divine osmosis. They acquire it because someone looks in the eye and says their name. Because someone repeats the word banana 43 times while waving a fruit like a lunatic. They learn because someone responds. And when you strip all of that away, when you lock a baby in silence, deny them affection, touch, noise, nonsense, you don't reveal a God-given truth. You extinguish the very conditions that make language possible. And so they fail to thrive. Infants stop developing. Sometimes they stop living, not from hunger, but from loneliness. These weren't experiments. They were tragedies dressed in scholarly robes. And the emperors who orchestrated them weren't pioneers. They were butchers with quills. There's a wistful beauty in imagining that we're all born fluent in heaven's tongue. But the truth? Language isn't divine. It's relational. It lives in connection. Spit-sprayed syllables and babbled nonsense, and the eye-crinkled joy of being heard. And that's what every one of these rulers missed. They sought God in silence. But if language was ever divine at all, they misunderstood the assignment entirely. But alas, dear viewer, our descent into royal folly is almost done. Let us now close this scroll with one final breath of theatrical regret. So, what did centuries of royal silence teach us? Not that Hebrew is holy, not that Phrygian is first, not that babies are prophets in swaddling cloth, but rather this: you can't extract truth from trauma. Every ruler who gagged a nursery in the name of science wasn't conducting research. They were inflicting harm. The failure wasn't methodological. It was moral. They turned children, gurgling, vulnerable, wide-eyed humans into petri dishes for divine vanity. But language doesn't live in test tubes. It lives in the chaos of conversation. In the slurred mama shouted at 3 a.m. In the babble battle of toddlers inventing grammar rules on the spot. In the exhausted parent's reply, "Yes, I see you. Say it again." Not one of these experiments produced the language of God, but every single one spoke fluent loss. We love to say that knowledge comes with sacrifice, but some sacrifices are just cruelty with better PR. So, no, the tongue of angels doesn't bubble up in silent cradles. It emerges in shared breath, in mimicry, in songs sung badly but sung nonetheless. And if there's a sacred word in all this, it's not Hebrew or Greek. It's this: hello. The first invitation to connection, the antidote to silence, and the one word every emperor should have said before damning a child to hear none at all.